Good afternoon. I'm Maria Hood, head of the EU office of the G7 Future of the Seas and Oceans Initiative Coordination Center and the action coordinator for the EU4OceanObs project at Mercator Ocean International. I'd like to thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity to present a brief overview of the G7 FSOI to the 9th EuroGOOS International Conference. And we will also be participating in the roundtable discussion on connecting the ocean observing and forecasting systems globally. In 2016, the G7 science ministers agreed to take an ambitious approach to ocean issues collectively and established the Future of the Seas and Oceans Initiative, which brings together marine scientists and representatives from government agencies and ministries across the G7 to enhance the collection and use of ocean data from the global ocean observing system. The G7 is still a new entity to many of us in the oceanographic community, so what can the G7 bring to global ocean observations? The G7 FSOI members working together on joint priorities offer a new mechanism for advancing the observing system. Across the UN system, G7 working groups often serve as pathfinders, piloting and testing activities for the G20 and the UN programs, where the mobilization of a larger number of countries having diverse interests and capacities would really be too complex. The G7 members fund more than half of the global observing system, and G7 FSOI activities are focused at the intersection of science and government. So they provide a link or a forum between the scientific community and the government agencies and ministries responsible for funding half of the observing system. The G7 FSOI works directly with the global ocean observing system and now increasingly with the decade programs as they develop to tackle issues where the G7 can add unique value, such as fostering agreements on priorities for coordinated investment across the G7 members, and providing leadership for leading-edge science and technology developments. The G7 science ministers agreed to address ocean issues through 5 main action areas: to enhance the ocean observing system, particularly the in situ infrastructure, to serve as a link between the observing community and assessments and reporting through the World Ocean Assessment, to improve data sharing infrastructure and address the many challenges of global data sharing, to enhance regional observing capacity, and to enhance political cooperation and agreements between the G7 members. At the end of 2020, the FSOI established a distributed coordination center, and we are currently scoping activities for joint action and activities among the G7 members in each of these action areas, in partnership with other regional and global programs. Since the G7 FSOI is still quite new, it's also important to understand what the G7 FSOI is not. It is not a new program, but rather a working group that works across the G7 members and the international community to problem solve targeted issues of observing system development. And it is not a funding program. It focuses on problem solving through establishing task teams and through the leveraging power that comes from agreements on coordinated joint implementation on priority issues. One example of this leveraging power is the big advance we now have in the biogeochemical Argo program, which the G7 members made a joint priority for implementation starting in 2017. This joint action is a prime example of the power of leveraging, where the coordinated joint action of the countries who fund more than half of the observing system create a synergy where the whole is more than the sum of the individual efforts. So coordinated, focused efforts around a small number of priorities is really the primary tool that the G7 is using to advance observing system implementation. The EU engagement in this G7 initiative is carried out through the EU4OceanObs project, hosted by Mercator Ocean International. This project is a foreign policy instrument action aimed at enhancing the collection and the use of ocean data through 2 main international partnerships, the G7 FSOI and GeoBluePlanet, The project is managed and steered through a cross-commission team that brings together foreign policy, research and innovation, defense industry and space, maritime affairs and fisheries, and environment. The EU4Ocean project works to support the EU International Ocean Governance Forum and its agenda, with a special focus on in situ observations. As a foreign policy instrument action, with guidance from EU policy directives and major EU programs for the coming decade, including Horizon Europe and Mission Starfish, our role is to serve as a liaison between the global observing programs and the EU observing programs. EU4OceanObs is only a few months old, and we are still in the phase of consulting with many EU programs that deal with ocean data collection and use. Our principal partners in this are, of course, EuroGOOS and EuroGOOS, but we'll also build on partnerships with the ocean-related research infrastructures, the data sharing, data products and services groups, and modeling and forecasting programs like the Copernicus Marine Service and EMODNet. Very importantly, the research and innovation activities that really work to advance the observing system across the value chain. And particularly we work with EuroSea and Blue Cloud, but also the sensor and technology programs Nautilus and Tech Oceans that together were all funded under the G7 FSOI flagship call. And of course, we will be working with many, many others, and we'll be reaching out to many of you in the coming months. This liaison role works in two directions. We work to promote EU priorities, EU in situ observing capacity and leadership with global partners, and work to influence the direction and priorities of those programs. So programs in the Atlantic and the regional seas, but also global programs and across the UN system. And the return loop is that we work with these global partners to support joint actions and global governance, and bring those global coordination needs and opportunities back to the EU program partners to facilitate closer alignment with global networks and to build on opportunities for new partnerships. The organizers were interested in hearing from programs about their priorities for the decade. Last month, the EU International Ocean Governance Forum published a set of recommendations and actions and priorities, and EU4OceanObs was named as an implementing partner for several of these. There are also many strong links between the EU priorities and the priorities being scoped by the G7 FSOI, where, of course, the EU is a full member. The EU has set a priority on, for example, coordination of ocean observations within Europe, but also increasing their resolution across the global ocean and working with other countries to support ocean observation infrastructure in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The G7 FSOI are also addressing global infrastructure through three main areas: the biogeochemical Argo fleet, augmented observatories, particularly enhancing the biology and ecosystem essential ocean variable, and reducing barriers to research infrastructure sharing. The EU has also identified long-term capacity for ocean observation management, coordination, integration, and co-design as a priority. And in the G7, we're also scoping activities in this area on evaluation and best practices and approaches for coordination and funding of a sustained observing system, and working with GOOS and the Decade programs on the observing system evaluation framework. Of course, a major emphasis in both the EU and the G7 is on capacity development, particularly on data-sparse areas where we need strong local partners who can fully participate in the global system. And both the EU and the G7 have identified the need for an international framework for global ocean indicators, developing an interconnected and comprehensive set of indicators that link the three pillars of sustainable development, so environment, economy, and society. And they also play a central role in the ocean value chain by bridging the gap between raw ocean data and ocean information required for sustainable management. And the EU and the G7 have both identified support for the development of a digital twin ocean as a priority, particularly focusing on the necessary underpinning required to make DTO possible, working across the full value chain from observations to data sharing, integration and interoperability, and advances in modeling and forecasting capability. So the G7 FSOI is currently scoping these activities for a full working group meeting at the end of June, where task teams will be established for those activities and that the members decide to prioritize. And these task teams will then begin broad consultation with partner programs in and beyond the G7 to target specific issues where the G7 can really make a strong contribution to advancing the observing system. So I invite you to visit our websites to learn more about the G7 FSOI and the EU4OceanObs project. Please don't hesitate to contact me for any further information, and I thank you for your attention.